Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Mondays with Mendy. We're sliding around today. All right, today we are going to explore the topic of gratification. What does it mean to enjoy the simple pleasures in life? And I emphasize the word simple because, as you all know, life provides us with a multitude of opportunities for pleasure. Gratification exists every moment in every way imaginable, and that could mean gratification from food, it can mean gratification from drink, from human interaction, gratification from sleep, from sexual activity. Every form of physical gratification exists on earth, and in each of our own ways we are offered those opportunities for gratification. So how do we find the simple pleasures? Gratification that not may seem as complex, but is a lot more sustainable and consistent, something that we can find satisfaction from, not just pure pleasure. That's what we're going to talk about today. If you look at society, you'll notice that over the last generation, we've had a huge increase in wealth, and people have found tremendous success, especially in the United States. As a result, our capacity for human pleasure, our ability to fulfill and sustain our pleasures has grown as well. And it's for that reason that society has become consumed with our own personal gratification. And this is obviously a dangerous and very slippery slope, because when your life begins to revolve around what makes you feel good and what is pleasurable to you, you can very easily and quickly lose any depth of value in your life. You can very easily and quickly lose your circumference on your morals and your values, because they don't matter. All that matters is what feels good. And very often in life, what feels good right now does not feel good 10 minutes from now. So what we end up doing is putting our trust and our faith into something completely transient. You can have a delicious piece of filet mignon, but tomorrow it's spoiled. It's gone. Maybe a week later you can't afford filet mignon. How do you find gratification now? So by harnessing pleasure simply from the superfluous and external trappings of the world, we often sell ourselves very short. Today, as we do every week, we're going to take one idea from the weekly Torah portion and explore that idea on a very practical, relative level. And that idea hopefully will inspire us to find better, more real forms of gratification and pleasure here on earth. So this week is an exciting one, because Jewish people around the world are beginning the third book of the 5 books of Moses. They finished Genesis, and then this past week they finished the second book, the book of Exodus, and this week they begin the book of Leviticus, which quite literally means the stories of the Levites. And the reason that it talks about the Levites is that it talks about the service of the Jewish people in the traveling temple, which was done to a large degree with sacrifices. As barbaric and gruesome as it sounds, it was a different time where, in that moment of time, people brought sacrifices and then subsequently would eat the sacrifice after it was offered, as a way of demonstrating their personal connection to God, to their faith. But interestingly enough, there were many different kinds of sacrifices that were brought. Some had related to animals. Some of them did not. There were, I guess you would call, vegetarian sacrifices that consisted of flour or barley in some instances, different options. So today we're going to talk about why it is that the Torah emphatically tells us that regardless of the sacrifice that you bring, whether it be a cow, sheep, lamb, bull, ram, whatever it might be, whether it be vegetarian, non-animal related, it cannot have 2 ingredients inside of its composition. And those 2 ingredients, interestingly enough, are yeast and honey. So no sacrifice brought in the temple, whether it was the traveling temple or later on the temple in Jerusalem, could have yeast or honey inside of it. And it's very interesting that in the poor man's offering, which was nothing more than flour and oil, you had these components components that were quite simple, quite basic, designed to simply bring something for someone that couldn't afford much. So it didn't have to be animal-based. Yet, these two components, honey and yeast, could not be brought, period, end of story. Not in any way, shape, or form. Not even a slight hinge of honey could be added to the sacrifice. And it's peculiar, because you'd imagine that offering a sacrifice, you want to bring something that's special, that's meaningful, something that's tasty, which represents the fact that you're excited, you're inspired to bring this to the temple. And honey, which is so sweet, you'd imagine that would be the first opportunity to show your enthusiasm in offering a sacrifice in the temple. But alas, nothing could be brought with any of these two ingredients, whether it be the showman's bread or anything else. Nothing could hold these two ingredients. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. Why is that? So you might say to yourself that this is really inconsequential. Today there is no temple. What does it make a difference, Mendy, whether they brought yeast or honey or juju beans or anything else for that matter? But as is the case with all of the details in the Torah, they're there as a guidebook. The word Torah means to instruct, and so every concept has relativity and importance in every time, in every setting. That's what it means to have a timeless tradition. So while it may not apply to us in a literal sense, we're not actually offering sacrifices in a temple, there's a concept, there's a theme behind this rule that does have great significance for us, that's going to teach us how we find true pleasure and true enjoyment even in the 21st century. Now, this rule about not offering honey or yeast to any sacrifices in the temple was very strictly enforced, to the point where someone that did bring that could have received lashes. They would receive 20, 30, 39 lashes just for that simple infraction. So it was a very strict rule that was very widely enforced. And honey doesn't just mean honey from bees, it can mean honey from dates. In fact, some of the commentaries like Rashi say that it means honey from any fruit extracted food could not be used inside of the temple for the sacrifices. So this is not a suggestion. This is not advice being given by the Torah. This is a clear-cut law saying this is forbidden entirely and completely. Question is why? Why is it forbidden? Yes, there are ideas in the Torah where there are no rationale for them, but by and large, most of the concepts in the Torah do have some sort of meaning and perspective. Rabbi Aaron Halevi of Barcelona, who wrote the book called the Chinuch, the Book of Education, tries really diligently. He really tries to find explanations for so many of the different commandments and traditions in the Torah. Yet he himself says that sometimes you come up against a brick wall and you really have to work hard to find a deeper level of understanding so that it can make sense to you and you can enjoy it that much more. So what is the understanding in this specific tradition? What is the connection between yeast and honey? And why are these two ingredients not allowed to be brought in the temple with any sacrifice? So we're going to bring a few different perspectives and talk about them. The first coming from Maimonides, the noted scholar, philosopher, doctor, astrologer. Maimonides was a giant in the Jewish community over the last 2,000 years of history. Maimonides offers up a lot of different concepts and traditions that we stay away from simply because it's compared to idolaters. So idolaters conducted certain practices, and just the mere fact that you have to distinguish who you are from them requires you not to engage in the same behavior. And Maimonides says that's including honey and yeast, because idolaters would bring up sacrifices to the Baal and to other fake gods, etc. They would bring up items that included honey and yeast. And so therefore we refrain from bringing any of those ingredients into our temple simply to highlight the distinction. That's one perspective. Then we have the Abarbanel, noted scholar who lived in Spain just before the onslaught of the Inquisition. Don Yitzchak Abarbanel says that honey and yeast are forbidden for a completely different reason. He says it's very technical. If you mix honey together with meat, the sweetness of the honey and the ingredients inside the honey, it will start to cause the meat to rot and decay. That's what will take place. So because you have to offer the sacrifices in a very specific time, timing is very important in the temple. There's so many different activities going on. If the meat starts to rot prematurely, it will ruin the scheduling in the temple, and that's why you didn't bring honey or yeast. This is what he says. This is what it would cause. We stay away from breaking the timeline that exists in the temple service, so we stay away from this ingredient completely. So here we have two explanations. Maimonides has to do with idolatry, and Dan Yitzchak Abarbanel says, no, it's purely technical. That's the reason we stay away from it. But as is our tradition here on Mondays with Mendy, we oftentimes look for a deeper explanation, something beyond the norm and under the surface that can enlighten how we live our lives on a regular basis. And there's something beautiful here in the story of the wheat and honey that explains why they were not brought on the temple, on the altar inside of the temple. So we know that inside each and every one of us, there is a struggle happening on a regular basis. And that struggle is between the good guy and the bad guy, the evil inclination and the godly soul, the spiritual inclination. You have two forces that oppose each other that are battling for rule and control, dominion over your body, over your thought, over your speech, over your actions. That is happening on a regular basis. Interestingly enough, the evil inclination, that is often compared to yeast. Why is yeast compared to the evil inclination? In the Talmud, it tells us that there was a rabbi named Rabbi Alexandri. He would often have this special prayer that he would utter up. We would say, Master of the universe, you know well that it is our will to perform your will. We want to be good people. We want to do what's right. What prevents us? It is the yeast in the dough, referring to the evil inclination that is constantly inspiring to convince us to do wrong and bad actions, bad things. And so here we see quite clearly this rabbi compares it to yeast and offers up his prayer that the yeast should be removed from him. What is the connection between yeast and the evil inclination? It's very simple. Yeast does what? It rises. It rises, goes all the way up. So too, when a person listens to their evil inclination and follows its directives, they become haughty, narcissistic, arrogant. They inflate their own self-value and worth in their eyes, just like yeast causes dough to rise. So here we see quite clearly that yeast and the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, have an essential and immediate connection, one with the other. And interestingly enough, honey also has a rising quality. Obviously, honey is not used in the same capacity as yeast, but honey, when it is heated, also starts to rise. It creates steam, which grows and becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. So the same concept of yeast being referred to the evil inclination could probably be extended to honey as well. And here we have quite an easy answer. Honey and yeast represent the evil inclination, and therefore they are not to be brought during the temple service on the Temple Mount. We leave those items off the table because they are contrary to what a person is trying to achieve by bringing a sacrifice, which is to humble himself, nullify his existence, so that he may connect in a greater capacity with God. And yet, there's another explanation brought. Similarly to the explanation that we just expressed, the connection between the honey and yeast and the Yetzer Hara, but this one takes a little bit of a different approach. Here, this commentary says that yeast, what does yeast represent? Yeast represents time, procrastination, because it doesn't happen right away. You add the yeast, and it doesn't rise right away. There's a story, a children's book that my kids love to read about a young lady who's early adolescence decides to make challah for Shabbat when her mom goes to the grocery store. And so she has a recipe and she adds the yeast. She sees nothing happens. So she adds a little more yeast and a little more yeast and a little more yeast until she has a giant challah that's grown all over the house and she can't contain it. And it's a really beautiful story. But that's the way yeast operates. It does not grow until it sits and sits and sits. And so by saying we don't want yeast in our spiritual service, what we're saying is we don't want procrastination. We don't want laziness. We want alacrity. We want quick, decisive action. We want to be swift. One of my children's names, one of my son's name is Tzvi. And people ask all the time, what does the name Tzvi mean? Where does it come from? It means a deer, as in the animal, a deer. Not because we love Bambi, but, although Bambi is beautiful, but because we want to encourage our children, and indeed ethics of our fathers tells us, to be swift as a deer. Oftentimes you know what the right thing to do is, but you allow your head to operate and operate and operate. You overthink it. You overanalyze, paralysis by analysis, to the point where you can't act. When you act swiftly like the deer, you see what you need to do and you get it done. You take the actions necessary. You find success. Much greater success than you would with procrastination and laziness. So therefore, the first reason, according to this commentary, we don't have yeast because yeast represents all of the wrong attributes. It's too slow, it rises too much, no yeast. How about the honey? What does the honey represent? So the honey represents sweetness. And this is very interesting. When a person becomes more spiritual, when a person becomes one of faith, they have to learn to refrain from what is naturally sweet. Because oftentimes that is not where they're going to find the greatest gratification and satisfaction. Just looking at your physical diet, were you to leave here today and go and start eating candy without stopping, without hesitation, candy for the next 24 hours, I'm going to put you on a candy diet. You're going to eat cake and cookies and donuts and popcorn and cotton candy and ice cream. All of that for 24 hours. Would it be sweet? Absolutely. You might eat yourself into diabetes, but it would still be very sweet. That's what a human being recognizes. This feels good right now. Spirituality and faith teach us to move beyond the here and now, to recognize something deeper and more profound than what simply feels good in this moment. So we don't have honey in our sacrifices because we don't want to get hung up on what feels good and tastes good in the short term, in the immediate. So we refrain from that immediate and instant gratification and rather put our time, focus, and energy into understanding what will pay greater benefits in the long term. Finally, we have one more explanation. And this explanation is that yeast, which is very sour, and honey, which is very sweet, represent the extremes in life. A spiritual life, a faith-based life, is one of balance. Balance. Not too high and not too low. And that can only be found with a life based on spirituality and faith. When your life isn't anchored to something that concrete, then as the events happen, you will be shaped by those events. Things are going well, you feel great. Things aren't going well, you feel terrible. Up and down, really manic depressive, to the point where many of us know people that can't control those emotions. That's the human condition, unless you have something to tether your existence to. If you can tether your well-being to something solid, something timeless, then regardless of your personal ups and downs, you stay steady. So we don't use yeast or honey in our sacrifices in the temple because they represent those extremes in life. And we are looking for a life of balance, of stability. That is how we find greater effectiveness here on earth. When a person approaches God, he approaches his faith and his spirituality, they oftentimes are looking for something. Right? People will come inside the synagogue and they'll say, Rabbi, if I had millions of dollars, then I could get involved. I could contribute. I could name this building after me. I could sponsor this program. But alas, God didn't bless me with millions of dollars. And therefore, I'm not involved. If only I had the millions of dollars, then I would be involved. Or somebody might say, you know what? If I was so intelligent that I can understand the Talmud, then I would have a place in the synagogue. If I had the mental focus and the fortitude to pray and meditate without interruption, then I would belong in the prayer services. If I was funny and I was outgoing and charming, then I would belong in the social settings and the cultural events. But alas, I have none of those. And therefore, why should I be involved in Jewish life? How can I possibly contribute to society? The Maharal of Prague, the famed Rabbi Yehuda Loew from Prague, who created the Golem according to the tremendous legend, and you can see his synagogue, which has been preserved beautifully, the Altenschule in Prague. So this man known as the Maharal, he said the following. He said, a human being is designed by God to contribute to society with what he has, with the tools and the talents that are given to him. Nothing more and nothing less. And should you go out and try to acquire the tools of somebody else without appreciating what you already have, you will not find success. If you are trained to be an engineer and you try to become an architect and you think simply because you have a CAD file, therefore you can be an architect, right? You've got some rulers and some pencils, I can be an architect, right? No, you cannot be an architect. And even more so, you cannot contribute and complete your portion in society through architecture. You have to do it through engineering. And so on and so forth, each in our own way. Yeast is a transferring agent. It causes us to transition and transform. And that is not what spirituality and faith is about. It's not about transforming into somebody else. It's about becoming the best version of who you are. You don't have to transform yourself into something different. You're already awesome. You're already wonderful. Believe in yourself. Believe in who you are. And use that confidence to inspire your personal service based on your personal identity. So don't bring yeast into the picture. No yeast, because yeast is how we go from being small to big, big to small. You don't need that. You don't need to become the bread. You can stay exactly the way you are and be successful doing it. So there are so many different explanations here for why yeast and honey are forbidden. It could be technical because they cause the meat to rot. It could be because it compares us to paganism. It could be because they are extreme tastes. It could be because they remind us of how we transform, but we don't want to transform. It could be because they cause things to rise, and that represents haughtiness and narcissism. So many different reasons for why the yeast and the honey. Simple line in the Torah, but it teaches us so many different dimensions. But the last concept that I want to share with you and leave with you today is that a human being, when they approach faith, when they approach God, we oftentimes do it half-heartedly. Half-heartedly. Everybody has their personal beliefs and feelings. I love myself. I love the way I look. I love my intelligence. I love my sense of humor. I love my physique. I love myself. And therefore, whatever I think, whatever I believe, whatever I feel is good, is pleasurable, that's what I feel is pleasurable. That's what I think is right. That's what I think is positive. That's what I think is good. Now, that's who I am. And now I approach God. I'm looking to create a spiritual relationship. But I'm not quite ready to give up on myself, to lose myself. I'm not ready to do that. This is how we oftentimes approach spirituality. We approach spirituality with what we believe, with what we think is good. Yeast, it's great. Why not include it in the sacrifice? Because if we include the yeast, it will cause the sacrifice to grow bigger. If we're bringing bread or flour with yeast, it won't be a small sacrifice, it will be a big sacrifice. Why not include honey? Honey's sweet. It's a delicacy. Let's include the honey. The Torah says no. This is not about your definition of what spirituality is. This is not about you defining what you believe faith is. Because if your faith is purely designed and customized by yourself, it's human-based. It's just as faulty and as finite as you are. You will not maximize the full potential of faith or spirituality as long as it's created in your own definition, with your parameters. If you really want to connect spiritually, you need to lose yourself. You need to nullify what you believe is your greatest intellect, your greatest humor, your greatest good looks. You need to forget about all of those things and focus on the fact that everything that you have was given to you by your Creator. It is all an extension and a reflection of God. And therefore, it's not about you. It's about what you can do by connecting with this existence, something much greater than yourself. When you empty your cup, you have more place to receive. A full cup cannot receive. Can't. Laws of physics dictate you cannot receive if you are full. So when you go to the temple, you approach to give a sacrifice, it's not about what you think are the right ingredients. It's not about what you think tastes good or is pleasurable or is not pleasurable. It's about losing your predefinition, your predisposition towards X or Y or Z, and being open to receive something new, something amazing. That's how we find spiritual connection. When you are looking for gratification in life, you can look at it in two ways. You can look at gratification as, okay, what does life provide that will make me feel good? What are the pleasurable experiences that I enjoy? I like to eat. I like to sleep. I like to play. These are the things that I enjoy. They bring me pleasure. And therefore, I'm going to engage in whatever brings me pleasure, what I define as pleasurable. Or you could take a step back and say, it's not about Mendy. It's about the world, the universe. It's about our Creator. It's about our shared collective existence. What is pleasurable? What is good for the world, for the universe? What is pleasurable for the Jewish people, for humanity at large? What do I believe will bring God greater satisfaction? And that's the pleasure that I seek. That's the gratification that I want. Because that's gratification that will be here tomorrow, and next week, and next year, and 10 years from now, and 50 years from now. And even long after I've passed, what I've accomplished and achieved will live on. That pleasure, that gratification will continue to exist. Whereas that piece of filet mignon, that's gone, baby. That's totally out the window. So simple pleasures. What are simple pleasures? When I think of what a simple pleasure is, I think of something that continues to exist. It's not complicated. To me, instant gratification is complicated. It's not simple. It's complex. Because it's always changing. It's always changing. Xbox, right? Then there's PlayStation. PlayStation 2. Then there's PlayStation 3. So if this is where your pleasure comes from, it's never simple. It's constantly evolving. You like this delicacy, but now they put truffles on it. So now you need to have truffles on your... Now instead of truffles, now they've added caviar. So now you got to have caviar on your dish. And then you've got to saute it. And then you got to deep fry it. There's always another dimension. So it's not a simple pleasure. Instant gratification might seem like a simple pleasure, but once you hitch your boat to that train, you will never find simple gratification. You will constantly be looking for the next and the next and the next. Whereas if you find something timeless, something true, something greater than your personal existence, that is simple. It's here today, it's here tomorrow. Helping a human being will always be a pleasurable thing for humanity. It will always bring greater benefit to humanity. So if you can find personal pleasure in helping an older lady walk across the street, that pleasure will stay with you today, tomorrow, and in 100 years. No different. No different. We see that in the Torah. So that's what it teaches us, not to bring honey and yeast. Forget about what you define as pleasurable, and look at what society says. Look at what the Torah tells us is truly pleasurable, that would truly give you gratification for years and years to come. As always, we want to thank you for joining us and invite you to email me at askmendy@gmail.com, askmendy@gmail.com, with any comments, questions, or critiques that you might have. Want to make mention that 2 weeks we're going to be celebrating the holiday of Purim, and we hope you'll join us for a wonderful party, Purim at the stadium at Ceviche Tapas Bar. That's 2 weeks from yesterday, Sunday. Visit our website for that. Also for Passover, which is coming up, we're having a Seder under the stars. Magnificent. www.chabadsouthampa.com. Thanks again, and next week we hope you'll join us as we talk about a very tough topic, the topic of anti-Semitism. What is the response to prejudice, and does it really still exist? Have a wonderful rest of the day.